Okay, so we are so honored and incredibly happy to have Professor Clare Mackay with us today. Claire is a professor of neuroscience at the University of Oxford and a passionate advocate for those living with body-focused repetitive behaviors, other known than BFRBs. And beyond her professional expertise, she brings a deeply personal connection to this topic, as she has lived with trichotillomania since the age of 12. So in today's session, Claire will share her unique perspective as both a researcher and someone with lived experience. Together, we'll dive into her journey, her advocacy, and her groundbreaking work to better understand and support those with BFRBs, like skin picking and hair pulling. So, hi, it's so
Hi.
wonderful to have you.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction.
You're more than welcome. We did have a pre-little like chat before we scheduled the webinar, and it was just such a fantastic conversation. I think we did go a little bit over our scheduled time, and it was just so enjoyable to talk with you, and you have so much knowledge, and you're just an incredible individual with so much experience and passion around this field. So we're just incredibly grateful to have you. So thank
Oh,
you.
thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. So let's start off. So could you share just with us, for those who may not be familiar or those who are familiar, what is your definition of BFRB? And could you also explain why they're often misunderstood?
Yeah, sure. So I tend to think in terms of the urges that we experience. So I define BFRBs as being the experience of uncontrollable urges to pick or pull or bite, most often at our hair or skin or nails. And I think of these behaviors as being these are normal behaviors. Everybody does them a bit. All primates do them a bit. In fact, most animals do them a bit. But for those of us, but for some of us, for some reason, once we start, we find it very difficult to stop. And that causes those of us who live with these behaviors a lot of distress. And that's when there's a threshold over which it becomes a disorder. And the reason, well, the list of reasons why these disorders are so misunderstood is long, but I think the biggest one for me is the way in which people assume, most people assume in the general public, that we're making a conscious decision to pick and pull or bite at ourselves. So the sense that we're choosing to do it, whereas actually what certainly I and most people I speak to would say we're choosing is not to do it. We don't want to do it, but we find it really, really difficult not to. So I think
Yeah.
the notion that there's a conscious choice that we're making, and we could choose not to if we chose not to, is the biggest sort of misunderstanding.
Mhm. And I think just adding to that, that really contributes to a lot of the shame and the guilt because,
Absolutely.
again, there's
And
that
the
perception
stigma.
that I've
Yeah,
chosen to
yeah,
do this. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And then what initially sparked your interest in studying VFRBs as part, of your career in neuroscience?
Well, my career in neuroscience is already 30 years old, and it's only very recently that I
Mhm.
realized that I could use it to try and understand and then maybe help people with these behaviors, with these disorders. And that's really because I lived with a huge amount of shame. You've already mentioned shame, and it was a very big part of my story. And shame is an incredibly powerful emotion, and it keeps us silent. And what I found is that it also completely squashes our curiosity. So I had some
Mm.
help to overcome the shame that I lived with. And once the shame was kind of dialed down, my natural curiosity was there and easy to access. And so once that curiosity was sparked, it was kind of a natural progression to then think, well, hang on, I've got some real knowledge. I've got some real knowledge about how the brain works that comes from my
Yeah.
professional expertise, but I've also got 40 years of lived experience with this disorder, so maybe I can put them together and do something useful. But yeah, it took me a long time to kind of put those put two and two together.
Yeah. So you have been very open about your own experience with your BFRB. Could you tell us then just a little bit about your story and your journey and what led you to speak openly after so many years of then keeping it private?
Yes, so I started pulling out my hair. I actually don't remember whether it was my eyelashes or my scalp that came first. They're probably around the same time. And then some years later, I started pulling out my eyebrows as well. I started pulling in adolescence, very common, pretty much
Mm,
the average age of onset. And that period of our lives is often tricky. Many people don't have the best time as an adolescent, and my adolescence was a bit tricky. My parents had split up a couple of years earlier, and for me the transition to high school didn't go so well. I was quite badly bullied, and so I found myself quite socially isolated, and all of that's around the same time. So I don't know, whether there's a cause or but
yeah.
it's coincident. It's coincident in time that that period of struggle for me as a young person
Mm,
was
mm,
coincided with starting to pull out my hair. But I also, it's important to also recognize for myself, it wasn't my first BFRB. So I've bitten my nails all of my childhood. So it was the
yeah.
hair pulling was the thing that caused me the most distress. And that started
Mm,
around that age. But actually, my nail biting, I don't remember back to a time before I bit my nails
mm,
and all of the skin around my nails. And so the BFRBs were already a part of the picture before the hair pulling started.
yeah.
Um, I was about 28 when I heard the word trichotillomania for the first time, so I'm old enough
Wow.
that it actually wasn't yet in the diagnostic manual when I first had it, and so I and my parents thought it was only me until I was in
Mm,
my late 20s, and that feeling of learning that it wasn't only me was so huge, so important,
yeah.
and such an important part of the journey. And then in terms of speaking openly about it, well, I guess a few stars aligned for me a couple of years ago. I've already talked about having some help with the shame. I
Mm,
also, at the same time, took a little bit of time out from work to just kind of reset the clock. I was post-COVID feeling a bit of like, oh, can't carry on like this. And it kind of slowly dawned for me that as I said, I could put these things together. And, being an Oxford Professor of Neuroscience, I sort of realized,
mhm,
well, hang on, I could maybe use my experience and my professional expertise and the platform that gives me to talk openly about it. And maybe if I can talk openly about it, that'll help other people feel less shame and feel more able to talk about it. And so it was a gradual process, but then of course inevitably there's one day when you go public, and then that's your coming out day, and from then everything is different.
I have recently discovered you, but I have been following you ever since, and you are doing so much work. And when you say that you are speaking up about it, you really are, and you're doing so much advocacy. And it's just amazing to see that. And um, I am incredibly positive that your words and your story is having an impact on others, and hopefully it is encouraging others to come out and speak out about it. And uh, yeah, it's amazing. And again, it's with gratitude that we say thank you to people like you who are brave in coming out and speaking so frankly and open about it.
Mhm.
It's incredible. Yeah, so I just wanted to then follow on with that. Again, with you opening up about it, how has that then impacted your personal life, and then also your professional life? And
Mm.
how were people reacting to that?
Mhm. Yeah, so it's been the short answer is it's actually been amazing.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that I didn't realize, I guess, the burden of carrying around a hidden disorder. You know,
Mm.
obviously I've managed to be successful in my life and I've managed to kind of get on with things, but
Mm.
nevertheless, it's only now that I don't carry that burden around that I realize that there was always a cost of having a hidden disorder. You know, we
Yeah.
like most people with BFRBs, I did everything I could to hide the
Mhm.
impact of my hair pulling and nail biting. And so that's a lot of kind of a cognitive effort that we spend thinking,
Yeah.
you know, is my makeup okay? Am I holding my hands okay? And it's
Mm.
kind of, it becomes so normal to us to do that,
Mm.
you know, in every situation, that we have no idea of what the cost of that is in
Yeah.
terms of carrying that around. So
Yeah.
personally, the biggest thing is not feeling the burden of having to hide. I described the day after I kind of came out by writing a blog that went onto the university webpage the first time. And the day after that, as I walked through the department where I've worked for many years, I had this
Mm.
feeling, and the only word I can use to describe this feeling is whole. Like I can just be me, I can just be all of me, and I don't
Wow.
have to hide anything
Yeah.
anymore. And that feels
Yeah.
amazing. Professionally, it's also been amazing, but it's been somewhat mixed. And so I've definitely had the experience of some colleagues um, immediately being kind of interested and impressed and wanting to know more and getting curious themselves about the
Mm.
disorder, and so, you know, having fantastic conversations with people who kind of go, oh, I haven't thought about that before, and putting ideas together. That's been the best thing in many ways, professionally, about speaking out. But I've also had, you know, some sideways looks and some kind of stigmatized comments about, oh, it's not really a proper disorder, or you're
Mhm.
not going to get funding for that. And I
Yeah.
just, you know, you just sort of, um, I guess I'm old enough and experienced enough to just think, okay, fine, you're not going to come on this journey with me. I'll just concentrate on you
Yeah.
people who are up for it.
I love that. I love that. That's amazing. Um, and as I said, yeah, I'm following you on the social media, specifically Instagram. I know that you also have a YouTube channel, and it's just amazing that you've like just really spread your wings. I noticed that you are a talented artist and a painter in particular. And I really enjoyed looking at some of your artwork, and it's incredibly amazing and really beautiful. But I was curious and I was wondering because I like to see myself as creative and an artist as well. And it's incredibly therapeutic for me, and just a joyous experience. But how has art played a role in helping you cope with or manage your BFRB? And do you think that creative outlets like art can be a valuable coping mechanism for others living with the BFRB?
Yeah, I really do, actually. I didn't start out thinking that that was a therapeutic thing for me. I picked up my paintbrushes again during the COVID lockdowns, like many people, and I'd always been kind of vaguely arty, but I hadn't done much painting at all between school, really, and the COVID
Yeah.
lockdowns. And you know, there was plenty of time, and so I just started playing around. And before I knew it, they were, you know, it was looking all right. I was like, oh, and then I started doing it more and more. And there's a couple of things that only kind of a big I only kind of became aware of through doing it. One is kind of the obvious one, which is that it occupies your hands. And I think that there is something about creating something with these hands of ours, these hands which are, you know, otherwise in danger of doing damage to us, and occupying them
Mm.
in something creative is kind of just a distraction, if you like. But I think it's more than just a distraction. I think there's something about the act of creation which kind of soothes us. And of course, BFRBs are a lot of their function is to self-soothe. So if we're finding other ways to soothe and be you know, put our bodies into a nice balanced state, then actually those urges do tend to diminish. So I think there's something important there. And then there's another way in which my art has become kind of important to me in relation to my BFRBs, which is that at some point I realized that I could try and use art, to use painting, usually painting, it's not always painting, but use it as a way to describe or express or depict a feeling.
Mm.
And so I on one occasion I had a hair pulling relapse, and as I kind of came out of the trance of that, I kind of thought, oh, now what does that feel like? And I couldn't have told you in words what that felt like, but I went to my easel and started making marks. And before I knew it,
Yeah.
I'd painted a swirl, which I now can describe to you as being the trance state of being stuck in a kind of BFRB pulling state. But I found that easier. I got that out of myself in an image before I could actually find the words that went with it. And so, I think
Sure.
there's lots we can get from using not just our words to express
Yeah.
the way we feel, the way and things that we might want. And I think
Mm.
art, finding other ways to express that is, I find, really helpful.
I agree with you 100%. And for those who are now scrambling on social media while they're busy watching this webinar, trying to find where can they find this and how can they follow you? I think now's the perfect opportunity for you to share that if you'd like.
Oh yeah,
How
well,
can people access your information?
well, I'm the Trick Prof, so at the Trick Prof, which we should put into a chat or something. I didn't think of doing
Yes.
that. But if you just search for the Trick Prof, you'll find my kind of main YouTube channel, Instagram channel, Facebook, Blue Sky. I've kind of abandoned Twitter and LinkedIn, I'm there as well. So those are all ways to find me. My painting, actually, I mostly put on a different Instagram account, but you'll find that if you just look through the Trick Prof for the arty pictures, and you'll find the link to, if you're interested in the art. I kind of keep that
Yeah.
slightly hidden.
I found it. So again, then just whilst we're on the topic of your social media accounts, you've recently introduced a peacock feather, and
Yeah,
I know that you have spoken about that,
I
and
have them
your
behind me.
reasons why.
I'll just get my peacock feathers. I'm in fuzzy mode, so it's going to be tricky. Here we go.
There we go. We can see it.
Just
So
about some
please
of the peacock.
explain to us, like, why did you choose the peacock
Yeah,
feather?
thank you. So peacock feathers, when I describe to people what it's like, what the impact of living with a BFRB is, I often describe, I don't think people can understand the impact without realizing how important our hair and our skin and our nails are
Mm,
to our
mm,
identity. And
mm-hmm.
so I use the phrase, our hair and our skin and our nails are the equivalent of our peacock feathers. And I said that, I used that sentence at one time to somebody that I was talking to that then became an article. And they used the peacock feather as a motive. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. That's
I love
perfect
that.
as a just a little motif of what it is that I want to do. And peacock feathers are, it's worth trying to get hold of one. They are absolutely gorgeous. They're
Yeah,
also, again, I'm not doing this very well. They're also
there
hairy.
you go.
They've got hairs on them, which is kind of appropriate for my hair pulling. Um, and then when you look up the symbolism of peacock feathers, there's lots of great things about bravery and courage and beauty, and all of the words that we want to be saying to ourselves instead of the awful
Yeah,
things that we
yeah,
often say to ourselves when we have BFRBs.
yeah. It's just so incredibly appropriate for you. It's just
Mm.
so beautiful and just so incredibly colorful. And as you said, all those meanings and symbolisms.
Yeah.
You couldn't have picked a perfect symbol for that. Um, it's beautiful. So again, just going back to your neuroscience and your research part of your life, from your perspective, then as a neuroscientist, what do we currently know about the brain? within respect to a BFRB? Like, take us through that sort of journey a little bit.
Yeah. The short answer to that is not nearly enough, is what we know about the brain, the mechanisms in relation to BFRBs. They haven't really, I mean, there are bits and pieces of things out there, but in terms of really understanding the core, as I've said before, for me, it's that core problem of experiencing uncontrollable urges to pick or pull or bite at ourselves. I don't think we know nearly enough about the brain mechanisms behind that. And I think partly the reason for that is that we as humans tend to want to simplify. We want an easy answer. We want to blame it all on something we've eaten, or so, or the time of the month, or childhood trauma, or we tend to want one explanation to explain something. And human behavior is just much more complicated than that. Actually, I think human behavior is beautifully complicated. And so there are many, many levels of understanding the brain and how, if you take a single behavior, the single act of pulling out a hair, there are many lenses through which you can, there are brain areas, there are genes, there are hormones, there are neurotransmitters, there are all sorts of things we can look at. There's cognition, there's et cetera, et cetera. And so I've spent the last couple of years sort of trying to figure out which areas of science do we need to bring together to understand, to answer your question. And I think there are 6 areas, and I'm not even going to try to go through those 6 today, but I will just give you one of them if that's okay. And that's understanding the act of picking and pulling and biting by looking over at our cousins, looking over our primate cousins, and looking over into the animal kingdom. So as I've already said, picking and pulling and biting is normal animal behavior. It's part of grooming. It's part of self-care for all animals, all the way through insects, through birds, through mammals. And particularly if you look at primates pick and pull and bite at themselves and each other all the time. What's particularly interesting to me is that, again, across many species, animals in distress often overgroom. So if you put a chimpanzee into captivity, not all of them, but some individuals will pull out more of their hair. Chickens pull out their feathers. Cats, if you put them in a cattery, they scratch off more of their hair. So over grooming is normal animal distress behavior. And there's actually tons known about this in the animal literature. So I've got reams of things that I've read here, and if you immerse yourself in them, you're like, well, of course, sometimes we pull out our hair and pick at our skin because all animals do. It's normal animal behavior. So yes, and for me, that gives me I find that personally hugely soothing, because it really helps with that. This is not my fault. Feeling.
If you could then, because we have a little bit of time, and just for the viewers to know that this is not the first, well, this is the first, but it's definitely not the last time we have Professor Clare Mackay with us. So we are going to be going into a lot more detail into all of these amazing topics that she's talking about. So we'll definitely see her a little bit later on in the year. But I wanted to ask you then, if you're obviously able to answer, if it is so common within the animal kingdom, why do we then just go to that extreme though? Like why is there that switch that does happen from normal grooming to then the over excessive grooming when we're in that distress? Is there an explanation for that?
I don't have the answer to that. I mean, and I don't. Well, or rather, I've got some hints and some clues about why that might be. But if I had to guess, if I had to make a hypothesis, which would then need to be tested, it's about that emotion regulation. So when we're in distress, our bodies are designed to try to get back into equilibrium. So if we find ourselves in kind of chronic distress, we're chronically looking for a way to regulate those emotions. And picking, pulling, and biting is a way to regulate those emotions. And obviously this isn't true for every member of, not every primate and not every human finds over grooming as a way to try to regulate emotions. But for some of us, that's the thing we found. Other people drink too much. Other people will become eating disordered. Other people get addicted to all sorts of things. For people with BFRBs, we have found a way, or rather, not we actually, our bodies have found a way to try to regulate emotions, which unfortunately gives us more emotions to need to regulate. And so I think of this is why I think shame is so important, because I actually think that shame isn't only an awful consequence of having a BFRB. I think it actually keeps us trapped in that need to self-soothe. And so, if you can take shame out of the equation, the need to self-soothe goes down, the urges go down, and you can maybe then get some more management strategies in to reduce the picking or pulling and biting. And that's actually exactly what my personal experience has been.
Yeah. So I think this kind of leads into my next question. And I'm curious, and I'm sure everyone in this webinar is curious for this question as well. How can neuroscience help with treatment and support for those with BFRBs? Is there even sort of that avenue to go down with regards to neuroscience?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And because how can, I mean, in a way, I mean, I don't mean to offend anybody by saying this, but until we really understand the mechanism, any treatment is just guessing, and so it's kind of we do the best we can with the information that we have, but the more we know, the better we'll be at treating it. So if I just take that same example that I just gave of shame. So shame is an emotion, is a social emotion. We all have it unless we're psychopaths. We need it in order to be able to operate as social animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
But chronic shame is kind of a different story. And so when we start to live with chronic shame, we put ourselves at greater risk of anxiety and depression and distress in general. And so that becomes a real problem. Now we can understand shame. We have a sort of fairly good understanding of shame psychologically, clinically, maybe, but actually, where in the brain does this live, and how is it how is it how is it interacting with those other circuits? At some point in our brain, a circuit is made that sends our hand to wherever our picking or pulling biting site is, and something is driving that message. And I think shame's part of that picture. It's again only a hypothesis at this point, but once we really understand those pathways, I think we'll be able, and by the way, they may well not be the same for everybody, so we'll need to figure them out for everybody, but we may well be able to sort of tailor interventions in a way that's actually more connected to how our brains work, and hopefully we'll find a way.
So I'm not sure if you're able to answer this question. How far do you think we are from seeing that then? Those types
Actually,
of
not so very
interventions
far. So I mean, I think that there's a huge sort of tragedy and opportunity in BFRBs, which is the tragedy is that they've been so under researched, and there's the amount of research on BFRBs compared to other, similar conditions is woefully small. But the opportunity is that we've got some amazing research methods now and amazing ways to reach lots of people. So we can go from the little we know now to knowing a lot more relatively quickly, I would suggest. And I mean, when we were chatting before we came onto the webinar properly, I told you that as soon as I started thinking about wanting to do some research in this area, I became very aware that I needed to also be using my voice to help people feel able to talk about and be open about their BFRBs, because I can't reach people to do the research if they're all hiding. And so there's a kind of for me, those two things totally go together, which is partly the motivation for wanting. I actually just want BFRBs not to be a secret. I mean, for so many people, they're a taboo, a secret. There's so much stigma. They're just a human behavior, and they're just an animal behavior. And so I want to I kind of, on the one hand, want the medical and research world to take it seriously and devote resources to it, because some people, some of us, really suffer. On the other hand, I want to say to the people who are suffering, you know, these are normal animal behaviors, and so we don't need to necessarily carry quite the shame that we do about them.
So for someone just beginning their journey, if they're watching this webinar, whether it's live right now or they're watching the recording, so for someone just beginning their journey of understanding and managing a BFRB, what would be the one piece of advice or information you'd like to share?
I mean, in a way, that's really easy. The key thing is it's not your fault. Nobody chooses this. And I think the greatest burden that I lived with for the 40 years that I lived with it in secret was the sense that it was my fault. When I would ask myself the question, why can't I stop pulling out my hair? The answer I gave to myself was, because you're bad, or you're wrong, or you're weird, or you're broken. And I think that we can, I think that there are much kinder, much more interesting, much more useful answers to those questions. And so it's kind of, it's not our fault. We did not choose this. It's not our fault. And actually, it's quite interesting. You know, it's quite interesting that some of us do this, and we can turn that shame into curiosity and really help ourselves, I think.
It's such a short but incredibly powerful statement. It's not my fault.
It's not our fault.
Yeah, I really love that. So, are there any exciting research projects or any advocacy initiatives that you're currently working on that you'd like to share with us? And if there are, and if need be, how can we get involved and how can we be a part of it and support you?
Well, there are a few things bubbling up. I'll tell you about one research project that we've done some of, and we've got the next phase of coming up, and then I'll tell you about something that's quite a little bit different. So you won't be surprised to hear that one of the things we're researching is shame, and so I'm working with colleagues. In the Department of Experimental Psychology in Oxford. So my collaborator and colleague Polly Waite, who is an expert in developing intervention children and young people, but knew nothing really, or knew very little about BFRBs until we started our conversations 18 months ago. So we supervised a student last year who did an amazing project to just start us off in terms of exactly what I said before, really, which is trying to understand the mechanism through which shame relates to hair pulling and those other comorbid conditions like anxiety and depression, because we know the reason that this is the focus for us and for this first project is we know that this is the age at which, for many of us, that's the age at which this behavior starts. It's an age at which we're particularly susceptible to shame because those peer relationships are just forming themselves. It's a complicated time being in an adolescent brain. And we know that if shame gets hold of us at that age, the risk of developing serious anxiety and depression goes up quite dramatically as you get older. So we're wanting to understand the mechanism, and so as a sort of precursor to thinking about how you intervene in relation to shame. And I sort of drew it with my hand before, but my sense is that there's a vicious circle. I think I feel a vicious circle when I'm stuck in a pulling episode, and in my vicious circle you've got some sort of distress at the top. That distress, by the way, could just be boredom. You know, it doesn't have to be anything particularly dramatic. The distress leads to an urge. The urge leads to the behavior. The behavior leads to some relief. That relief is quickly followed by shame, which keeps you in distress, which keeps you in the circle. So we're kind of testing whether that's right, and so we've finished the first round of that, and the paper's available. If you follow me, I'm just about to put out an Instagram post that'll describe the results of that paper. And now we're following that up by looking at it in a little bit more detail, trying to find the cause and effect bits of it. So that's all going on, and it's all very exciting. And Polly's amazing to work with. And then the second thing I thought I'd tell you about is something I never in a million years thought I would ever talk about or think about or be involved
Yeah.
in life, which is engaging the hair and beauty industry. So
Mm-hmm.
and as somebody
Mm-hmm.
who lives with BFRBs, I've spent most of my life thinking that hair and beauty is kind of not for me. I'm not really allowed to,
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't control the urges to pull out my hair and my eyelashes and
Yeah.
bite my nails. I kind of don't deserve to look nice.
Mm.
And I think that I now think, with shame out of the way, I now think that people with BFRBs need to look nice more than everyone else. And so I think that there's a really important role that the hair and beauty industry can play in this. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
sort of at the beginning of a project. I worked with something in the UK called the National Hair and Beauty Federation last year to do a sort of an awareness raising campaign about hair pulling, trichotillomania. And now we're thinking about the next stage of that. And what I would love is to get to a point where hair and beauty practitioners or salons can have a BFRB friendly badge, so that those of us
I love that.
for whom walking through that door is
Mm-hmm.
incredibly nerve-wracking can know
Yes.
we're going to a safe place where we're not going to have to explain, and we're
Yeah.
not going to have to,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to be told off or told to stop it, all those things that
Mm-hmm.
we dread and hate so much. And then maybe we can feel better about how we look, and that will help us with the shame. And so that's kind of a bit of a mission, and I'm doing it myself. I'm living it. I've had my nails professionally done to try and help me stop biting, and it really works. So and I've never done
Yes.
that before. So it's I'm trying it out as I'm figuring it out.
They look amazing. And it just sounds like you're tackling this from so many different dimensions and angles, from the brain to beauty. Like it's just, you are leaving no stone unturned.
Yeah.
Um,
Doing too much at once. But no, that's it's because it all needs doing. And actually my modus
yeah,
operandi is not to do it all. My modus operandi is to try and get more and more people interested and keen to do it themselves. And so,
for
I'm not going
sure.
to be running any hair and beauty salons. I'm just going to try and promote the knowledge, maybe set up some training somewhere so that can happen without
Mm.
me. I'm not planning on trying to do it all.
It just again just proves how passionate you are about this, that you have so much energy, and you're just trying to spread it wherever you can.
It
It's
feels a bit
inspiring.
like it's 40 years of pent up energy, 40 years of living
Yeah,
in secrecy and shame.
yeah.
And at some point, well, I was lucky enough to have what I needed to be able to get beyond that shame. And now it
Mm.
feels like there's plenty to do. And I'm not doing it alone, of course. There's plenty of us doing what we can around the world to raise awareness, reduce the stigma, and just try and make the conversations about BFRBs feel less agonizing for those of us who have them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This has been such an amazing conversation. There've definitely been a lot of little things that as you said, we wouldn't expect to talk about. We shared a lot of, I think shame has been quite a big theme. Um, and I know, I facilitate some of our support groups here, and that does definitely come up a lot. So I know that is a frequent concern from people, and I'm so excited to hear that there's going to be work, coming in the future that can look at that a little bit more closely and possibly provide some relief and some solutions.
Mm.
So we are at the end of our conversations. I'm going to be opening up the Q&A or the chat box and see if there are any questions here, they definitely are. So what I'm going to do, not everyone is able to see these. I'm not going to say anyone's names, but I'm just going to read out the questions so everyone is able to also follow along. So one here is what would be your recommendation? Oh, just before I continue again, if we don't get through all of them, please do email us. I will share the email address with you guys again. So it's support@skinpick.com, and the other email address is support@trickstop.com as well. Okay, so what would be your recommendation for my daughter? She's 14 years old, and me as a parent, when nothing seems to control her impulses. She has skin picking issues in her face, and she does not have acne, and uses Prozac and Abilify currently. Her BFRB started in her legs when she was 5 years old. Do you think this could stop at some moment in her teen years?
I see that there's another question also about a parent wanting advice for their children, and I wonder, Meryl, whether you're actually better to give advice about this. I'll give my 2 penneth, but of course there aren't straightforward answers. If there were, we wouldn't be here. I guess I do have some thoughts about. So first of all, I think that parenting around BFRBs is really hard. So my heart goes out to those of you who are watching this and wanting to know how to help your child. I unfortunately, when I was a child, there was literally nothing out there available for my parents, and so they just, they were in the dark and used their instincts, and their instincts were not the same as each other. So I had one parent who got quite anxious about the pulling and told me to stop it a lot, and the other parent who who wanted it to not be a problem, and so kind of ignored it, pretended it didn't exist, and neither of those were particularly helpful because neither of them recognized my struggle with it. But the thing that I feel like I want to say to parents is recognize that the distress that you're experiencing as separate from the distress that your child might be experiencing. And I am a parent, so I know that that's actually quite hard to do. Recognize that when you're seeing your child picking or pulling or biting, you feel distress that is separate from your child's distress. And it's really important, I think it's really important to both recognize that and try and get support for that outside of what your child needs. And so parent support groups, I think, are a wonderful thing. I think they're, connecting with other people who are experiencing the same struggles is really good. But as a parent, and my child has, does a little bit of skin picking, it's not so bad, but I'm very conscious of how I parent around it, and I have to really inhibit my natural instinct, which is to tell him to stop it. So I'm kind of, I don't really know the answer, but I'm kind of conscious that part of the answer is we have to kind of inhibit our natural instinct, which is to tell them to stop it.
I can resonate with that so much. So some of you may know and some of you might not. I'm a parent of a hair puller and a skin picker. So my son has trichotillomania and my daughter has skin picking. And it is incredibly difficult and hard to, pull yourself away from wanting just to say, just stop. Because there is that instinct in you. It's a protective instinct that you just want the best for them. And you just want them not to, hurt themselves. And I cannot agree with you more that when we are able to regulate our own emotions, our children are able to mirror that. When we are not able to do that, it exacerbates and accelerates their distress and their urges as well.
Exactly.
So I cannot stress more that getting support for yourself as a parent, making sure it's a whole when you're on that airplane and the oxygen masks fall down, like what do? You put it on yourself first. And I know it's instinct to want to put them on your child first. I'm the first parent to definitely want to do that as well. But when you take care of yourself first, you have the
Exactly.
capacity and the ability in order to take care of your kids. And it's incredibly cliched, but
Exactly.
we seem to just forget it so often. So I cannot agree more. Getting support for yourself as a parent first. In fact, we have a parent program. So for people who are too young to go through the program independently on by themselves, it's so incredibly important to support and upskill the parents because they're the greatest influence in that child's life. So my advice here, or my guidance would be, is to explore the parent program that we do offer. It's an opportunity to empower yourself and able to better understand the disorder and better help you in order to communicate and support your child in a more positive way. Here's another question.
Do you
Okay,
mind if
I've had
I cherry pick? There's one that I really
yes,
want
please. Yes, please.
um, somebody asked, how do I deal with setbacks? If I've successfully managed a period
Yes.
of time of no pulling and then have a setback, the shame, guilt, and beating self up is almost worse than if you're consistently doing the behavior. The reason I cherry picked that is because this is very much kind of where I am now. So I've spent all my life beating myself up about my inability to control these urges, and learning how to be compassionate, to be kind to myself and compassionate to myself in a after a setback is still a work in progress. But and it does happen. The I now think of shame as my enemy, so I really work well, I guess I've had some help to recognize the shame voices and to recognize the shame feelings and to try to replace those with kindness and compassion. But the biggest thing I think that a really lovely thing that somebody actually put on a post of mine when I talked about having a relapse was to think of lapses, not relapses. So relapses has this kind of inherent sense that we are back to square one, like all the work we've done is gone. We might as well have not bothered. We are all the way back at the beginning. If you think instead of lapses and think of them as being completely expected, they're a bump in the road. So my ambition in life is to have long flowing eyelashes, and I sometimes just about get there, but almost always there's a little bit missing somewhere. And my sense these days is that I just need to accept for myself that the long flowing eyelashes that I wish for can probably only really be got by having false eyelashes, and that I'm a human being who has uncontrollable urges to pull out my hair. And when I have a relapse, it's because I needed something in that moment, and in that moment my body needed to be able to regulate itself, and that's sad. So I lean into sadness and away from self-recrimination and shame. So it's perfectly okay to be sad about losing some eyelashes, but it's not okay to say that I'm a bad person and I'm useless and I'm hopeless because I've lost my eyelashes. And I'm talking about how I talk to myself. So compassion and kindness are skills that one can learn, and they have to be practiced, but they really help me. It helps me more than, so I don't try to stop. I don't actually even, my ambition is not to stop pulling out my hair. I don't, it's ridiculous to think that I will never have urges. My ambition is to live well with the fact that I have BFRBs. And that's a slightly different way of thinking about it. And I find that it means I've got way more eyelashes than I ever used to have.
So there's another question here that's sort of related to this, and I know you've touched on it, but perhaps we could get more of an answer here specifically for this person. So on the topic of shame, could you share your opinion or thoughts on what is the opposite then of shame? You have mentioned them, throughout our conversation, but maybe just then specifically here again.
So I think shame is a social emotion, and it is the reason it exists is because we're social animals, and we need an internal checking mechanism to say, am I doing or being anything that's going to cause me to be rejected from this social group. So that's what shame is for. It's kind of a, am I safe here? Am I safe in this? Am I going to, because, and of course, remember that you don't have to go back in human history to when we were nomadic hunter-gatherers, to a time when if you were shunned from your social group, that was a mortal fear, which is why shame is so powerful. So we need, as social animals, to be kind of fairly constantly checking in about whether we're doing anything that's going to cause us to be ousted and therefore in mortal danger. That's what it's there for. So I suppose that the opposite of that is safety, comfort and safety. You could say, I suppose, I don't know, pride is possibly kind of, I don't know, pride doesn't feel quite right as an opposite. I think it's a feeling of complete safety in my social safety, I think, is the opposite of shame. So I don't need to worry. I am completely socially safe here.
This is a really interesting question. Has your research led you to looking, oh, no, not that one. We'll get to that one now. This is it. Has any of your research been triggering for you?
Yeah, I like this question.
Yeah.
At the opposite, actually, I find it.
Yeah.
I always find it soothing. So I find the fact that other people are interested in BFRBs, that people come and talk to me about BFRBs, that all of you asking questions about BFRBs, I find that all soothing. And so and as I've just said, the opposite of the kind of stressy feeling of that drives me into picking, pulling, biting is feeling soothed. And so no, I don't find it triggering at all. I find it soothing.
There's
Oh, there
another
was could
question
I
here.
actually,
Yes.
while I'm on that,
Yes.
there was a question about getting married and wanting to be
Yes.
beautiful. And somebody asking about advice about how to prepare for something really big, and the big event is stressful, and therefore the picking, pulling, biting is and wanting to look beautiful. And there's and I just sort of want to reach out and give a virtual hug to this person, because I so feel that. I feel that you know, you want your wedding today to be the day you look the best, but it's so much rides on it. We put so much into these days in our lives. We can't expect our poor bodies not to need to be self-soothing in the run-up to it. And so I suppose that I just it's I haven't got any great answers for you except compassion. You know, recognize. Well, I know. I guess I do have a specific suggestion, which is really recognize that if you're picking, pulling, biting, I can't remember which type of bee you're a picker.
Picking, yeah.
If your picking is you can tell that your picking is worse in relation to the stress of your big day. What you need to give yourself is as much compassion as you can find, and if possible, recognize that what you need is soothing, and see whether there's anything else that you can find in your life that is soothing to you, and try to sort of divert some of that energy into that activity instead. But it's really hard.
The fact that I'm in South Africa, you're in the UK, we have listeners all around the world, the US, Australia. It's just amazing what an amazing community we have. So this is a bit of a difficult question to obviously answer, but more of a generic answer would obviously help. If speaking about all your research within this specific field, there was a question here. How can a master's or a PhD student recently graduated and they're interested in research? How can they get involved?
Yeah, great question. So I guess if you're already in a research program, or you're in a master's or a degree program of some kind, then my recommendation is to try to find a supervisor that's in your institution who you can persuade to get interested enough in BFRBs to help support you doing a project in BFRBs. It's quite tough, because at the moment the field is so tiny and there's very little funding in it, and so yeah, my for the last 10 or 15 years, I've been mostly doing dementia research. So I know what the difference feels like. So I would have a very different answer to somebody who is interested in doing dementia research than somebody who's interested in BFRB research. I think that we as a community inevitably have to start small without the huge research grants that we will hopefully get but haven't got yet, and think about what we can do as stepping stones along the way. That person's welcome to connect with me, and I mean, there's limited things that I can do, but I want to do whatever I can to support people getting started on that ladder of doing BFRB research.
Amazing. I don't think we have time for more questions. There is quite a lot here.
Could I just say to the person who asked where they could find out about the 6 things, that if you look at my YouTube channel, the BFRB conference that we held in Oxford in October, my introductory talk on that will tell you the 6 things.
Fantastic.
And I'll come back and tell you all about the 6 things if you like.
Yes, we're definitely going to have Claire back. And like I said, if your question was not answered, or if you rewatch this again, or you've just given yourself a little bit more thought, and a question pops up, please do email us. I see there's more questions coming through. We'd really love to answer all of them. Please email us and we will do our best to get through to all of them. Again, it's you can go to our website. Our contact information is there. Our email address is support@skinpic.com or support@trichstop.com. Please, Professor Mackay, please can you share your social media handles again?
Yeah, I'm the Trick Prof.
Asking.
So at the Trick Prof, the Trick with an H, so TRICH. It's all one word, the Trick Prof, and that's Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Blue Sky, but not really Twitter anymore. Thanks.
And then you can also follow us on our socials. All the information is on our website. You will find it at skinpic_com or trichstop_com. We're on all the social media platforms. And for those you waited right till the end for that promo code, you can use the promo code webinar 100 and you can get $100 off your first month. If you forget that code, that is okay as well. You can just email me and we'll happily send it your way. Thank you, everybody, for joining and for all the amazing questions. It's wonderful to have a big group, be a part of this, and a huge thank you to you, Professor Mackay. It's been such a pleasure. As I'm sure you can tell, there's just too much to talk about, so we're definitely going to have you back. But thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great to talk to you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.